Hi everybody, Corinne Smith here. Today I'm responding to a tag that's made some of the rounds here on BookTube, and this is called the My Reading Life in 10 Books tag, first started by Kelly of Books I'm Not Reading, from a prompt given to her by one of her followers named Victoria M. And the full prompt reads, tell us about the 10 books that most strongly formed you as a reader, from the first book you read on your own, perhaps, to today, and why they are significant. Wow, interesting food for thought, isn't it? And my first reaction is, only 10? How can that be? It's impossible. Or is it? So, what I've come up with are indeed 10 representative books, 10 plus representatives books that somehow influenced me as a reader. Each one of these books stands for a whole slew of other books that followed in their booksteps. And many of these books still influence me today. I am taking this prompt seriously. I am indeed going back chronologically to my childhood. And so, of course, for number one, we need to start with One Fish, Two Fish, Red Fish, Blue Fish by Dr. Seuss. First came out in 1959. Evidently, it's one of the first books my parents bought for me and that they read to me a lot. So much so that my mother used to tell the story that one time when I was still very young and my grandparents visited, I picked up this book and I started reading it aloud and turning the pages. One fish, two fish, red fish, blue fish, black fish, blue fish, old fish, new fish, gone and on and on. I'm reading the book and my grandmother says, she can read. And my mom said, no, she just has heard it so often she's got it all memorized. So this is the first book, of course. And, of course, it led to others. It led to The Cat in the Hat. The Cat in the Hat comes back. Are You My Mother by P.D. Eastman, and Put Me in the Zoo by Robert Lopshire. I still have them all. I love these. How can we not love these, you know? But it all started with One Fish, Two Fish, Red Fish, Blue Fish. That's where we have to start, right? And they all carry... forgot to show you this, they all carry the popular book plate that my mother decided was my own. Maybe some of you had that one too. My mom wrote my name in there, that's her handwriting. And then down here is a label from where they bought the book, Hers Bookstore in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Long gone. This was before the age of big box stores, before we even knew what Barnes & Noble or what anything else was. So yeah, this already evokes a lot of memories, just this one book. How can you not start with Dr. Seuss? Both of my parents liked to read a lot. We always had books and magazines and newspapers in the house. And as I began to start reading longer books, what we would call chapter books now for the young people, I really liked the idea that you could have a book of characters and then there would be more books with those same characters in them, and there would be ongoing stories. Seemingly they would go on forever. And so that's when I found the Bobbsey twins. Number 2, the Bobbsey twins by Laura Lee Hope. Here's the first book in this series, and I did have the ones with the purple and the white spines. This edition came out in 1961. This is actually a 1980s reprint of it, but these are the kind I used to have. Maybe a dozen or two, right? And then, of course, keeping on with number 2, the Bobbsey twins inevitably led to Nancy Drew. And here's The Secret of the Old Clock, the first episode in this series, and I had the yellow ones. I had probably 24 or more Nancy Drews, and many mystery readers and even mystery writers will tell you that their love of mystery series began with Nancy Drew books, reading them as a child. It was an easy bandwagon to jump onto. My cousin Cheryl had her own collection of them too, and whenever we got together a couple times a year, we would tag team read Nancy Drew books in this weird creative sort of way. I don't know why we did this and how we started it, but one of us, we each had a different book. One of us would read a page from one out loud, and the other person would read a page out loud from theirs, and it was sort of a call and response, and the duty of the second person was to find something that sounded like something funny to resolve what was going on in the first one. We played it for laughs. You had to scramble to find something that sounded odd or funny in response to the first. I can't explain it otherwise, in any other way other than that. And it was great afternoon entertainment for us reading the Nancy Drew books this way. I did sell all my original Bobbsey twins and Nancy Drews, so I actually went on eBay to get these to show you. I probably shouldn't have sold them, but you gotta make way for more books, right? You gotta make way for more books. So, moving on to number 3, because I'm taking this prompt seriously, and I'm literally going back to my younger years. I'm going to break the mold here and show something non-traditional that none of the other booktubers have shown, and that is the World Book Encyclopedia. Because for Christmas, when I was 9 years old, I got my own set of the World Book Encyclopedia. 20 volumes. Wow. Here's the A. We had the wooden stand that the whole set sat on, too. You mean I can look up information anytime I want to? Are you kidding me? Of course. This was terrific. My own encyclopedia. So this is the A volume of the 1966 edition. You can see how it aged against the wooden stand because they're all on an angle. I still have the set. I still have the wooden stand. And yes, on occasion, I still actually use it, even though it's out of date. Seriously, out of date. But what I loved about the longer articles was that they had questions at the end. They had a study guide and questions at the end. And you could actually, teach yourself some of these topics if you wanted to. And so I went through and I made lists of all of these articles that had these. I was nuts. I was nuts. And I know getting this set made an impact on me both as a reader and as a future researcher. Okay? And equally as valuable to me, I'm keeping this with number 3, equally as valuable to me was the Scholastic book program. You see Scholastic Book Services here on the bottom. I'm hiding the identity of the book for a moment. Scholastic Book Services program that we had at school. Every month in elementary school, our teachers would give us little paper forms crammed with pictures of colorful books, and we could order them and they would come in a couple of weeks. Oh my goodness, this was great. Every month I studied those forms. I always wanted more books than I could get, and I don't know, I was limited. I can't remember if it was 1 or 2 or 3 books a month that I was allowed to get, and I don't remember if I had to pay with my allowance or if my parents paid for it. I think I was limited to 1 or 2 a month. And so I started growing my own library with the Scholastic Book Services book. I think the only one I have left right now is 3 Stories from Winnie the Pooh. It came out in 1966. I know I got this through school. 1966, I wrote my name right above A.A. Milne's name. And I saved this one because, who doesn't like Pooh? But I had a whole lot of them. So yeah, my number 3 is World Book Encyclopedia and Scholastic Book Services. I'll bet both of them changed other kids' lives too. Let me know in the comments below if you agree. So, moving on to number 4. When I started going to Farmdale Elementary School, our school library was kept behind the curtain on the stage of what was not only the auditorium but also our school cafeteria. It was crammed full of books. And then, when I was in 4th grade, the school expanded with an addition on one end of it, and the library got its own room with shelves and doors and windows. And wow, suddenly it was easier to find books, and I found My Side of the Mountain by Jean Craighead George. Again, wow, are you kidding me? What kid doesn't want to run away from home and live in a tree in the mountains? I mean, really. The book originally came out in 1959. I'm pretty sure it was 1967 when I got the hardback out of the library with the cover of animated Sam's face on the cover. You might remember what that looks like. This is obviously a newer paperback. I couldn't get a copy of the old one. But I was already a Girl Scout by the time that I read this book. I was already spending time outside. I had my own tent in our backyard, on and on and on. So this was the right book at the right time for me. And I am sure that it set the stage for greater and more important books to come into my life, some that I will mention here in a few minutes. And also, fourth grade was the same year that I decided I wanted to be a librarian. Now that I could see what a real library could look like. In my junior and senior high school years, my mother and I sometimes read the same books, or the same kinds of books, romances, mysteries, books by people like Phyllis Whitney, Victoria Holt, and also some chunky books like James Michener's, especially Chesapeake, because we lived in the Chesapeake Bay watershed. And by then, it was the middle of the 1970s, and suddenly there was a cultural movement afoot, because soon enough, it would be the year 1976. And you know what that would mean, the American bicentennial. Dun, 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 dun. And before we could even turn the calendar to that date, we got number 5, The Bastard by John Jakes. Oh my goodness. The first book in an ongoing series called The Kent Family Chronicles, popular historical fiction tracing one family through colonial times and into the years beyond. It was a phenomenon, and my mother and I jumped on it and read them all one after another, and then watched the movies on TV. And because of the monumental success of this series, more historical fiction series sprang up, and I read a lot of them about settling the Northwest Territory, about the settling the American West and California, on and on and on. It was back to series books for me, as this time as a young adult and this time historical fiction. And I realized that you could learn a lot of history by reading historical fiction, details that you never learned in school. So it was a true delight. I think I read all of John Jakes' books beyond the initial first series. I had them all, don't have them anymore. Again, I bought this one online to show, but it's a pristine copy of The Bastard. I bet nobody ever read it, poor thing. I'll have to reread it. I even emailed John Jakes at one point in the 1990s to thank him for writing about a specific topic in a specific way. And because it was the early days of the internet and email, he actually answered me himself and thanked me for noticing what I had pointed out. So that's all good stuff. And thank you, John Jakes, for everything. Now, of course, it was also around this time that my 10th grade English teacher, Harold Sackwald at Hempfield High School, turned me on to Henry David Thoreau. He didn't know what he was doing at the time, and I had no way of knowing what this connection would lead to. In Mr. Sackwald's class, we read Thoreau's essay, Civil Disobedience, and also some portions of Walden. And I was literally blown away. For some of us, Henry David Thoreau hits us hard when we read him in high school or college. Here we are as young people trying to figure out our own role in society, our own way of going about our lives. And here comes a guy who says, you know, you don't have to be like everybody else. And you have your own higher law inside of you. You know what's right and what's wrong. And you say in response, are you sure? Because that's not what I'm hearing on the outside. But you get into reading him, and it's like, okay, I want more of this. I want more of this. And so from the snippets of Walden that we read in 10th grade, I knew that I wanted to read the whole book. I knew that I had to read the whole book. So in my junior year, I checked out Walden from the school library. It wasn't this edition. The one the library had looked similar, but was bigger and fatter, and it was probably from the 1950s or 1960s, and I carried it around with me for weeks, going into months. I kept renewing it over and over again. I just couldn't successfully get through that first chapter of 100 long paragraphs that go on and on. They can admittedly be a killer. Finally, I had to admit defeat, and I returned the book to the library unread. and I was frustrated. But in my senior year, I took an elective course in the American novel before 1900 because I read in the course description that Walden was going to be one of the books to be read, even though it's not technically a novel. Or is it? Topic for another discussion. Anyway, Thomas McVeigh was the teacher, and when we got to that part of the course, I went to the Park City Mall and the Walden bookstore that just opened there, and I bought my own copy of Walden because I knew it would be important to me. I wanted to underline my favorite sentences as I went along, and that's what I did. And Mr. McVeigh was very good at explaining things. He got me through that first chapter, and that sealed the deal. Henry David Thoreau has been with me ever since. I read everything that he wrote. I read tons of books about him. Eventually, I wrote about him myself. Westward I Go Free, tracing Thoreau's last journey, about his trip to Minnesota, and then Henry David for Kids for middle grade, a book of biography and activities. It's insanity. It's just insanity, right? I also wrote a time travel novel of Henry and me together. You don't want to know. It's in a drawer. It's in a desk drawer. But I've given dozens of public programs about him, so actually my reading life has impacted and become my writing and speaking life. And that's the very short version of that story, because I am also now the manager of the Thoreau Society shop at Walden Pond in Concord, Massachusetts. I work at Walden Pond 5 days a week. I sell copies of Walden 5 days a week. How about that for the power of the written word? Moving on. Reading books by and about Thoreau led me to reading tons of other books. Biographies about his friends, histories of the times, the biographies of his friends. I'm talking about the Emersons, the Alcotts, the Hawthornes, other people, geographical histories. But most often, Thoreau led me to reading other nature-related books. And immediately, these are not among my 10, but these are show-offs. Immediately, a Sand County Almanac by Aldo Leopold and Desert Solitaire by Edward Abbey. I mean, come on. Plus many others. By now, I was living in a small town, a small city in central Pennsylvania. We didn't really have bookstores, big bookstores there. Authors never came through there. And so when I found out that a local nature writer was going to appear and was going to have her books at a small bookstore, I jumped at the chance to go see her and meet her. And it turned out to be Marcia Bonta, who wrote Escape to the Mountain, about the property that she and her family lived on. Marcia was in the process at the time of writing 4 seasonal nature books called Appalachian Spring, Appalachian Summer, Appalachian Autumn, Appalachian Winter. Spring had just come out when I met her. And so it was great to be able to meet a real life nature writer and to be able to chat with her, especially since I also wanted to be a writer myself. So from this experience, I learned that there were many great nature writers out there, not just these standards. There's lots of people. And I kept reading them, and I still keep finding more. I still read lots of fiction, of course, at the time. I still read lots of histories. Eventually, I heard about a new mystery series that was gaining in popularity, and I think I came late to it. I think I came into it on the 3rd or 4th book, which would have been either the letter C or D, because this series was the Kinsey Milhone series by Sue Grafton, and I'm showing you A is for Alibi. Yes, I was falling into series reading again and loving every minute of it. And this time, as an adult, it's a mystery series. And after all, A is for Alibi, B is for whatever it was. This series had the potential of being 26 books long. Yay! Sue only made it to 25, but thank you very much, Sue. That's okay. Actually, around book R or S or T or U. I was living in Illinois. I actually met Sue Grafton at a book signing in Winnetka, Illinois. She was just a lovely person. I did not ask for an autograph. I thought that would be tacky. But I did want to thank her for all she'd done. I told her I was a librarian. She said her sister was a librarian. That's why she always put librarians in her books, yada yada. It was great. But anyway, reading her series, again, led me to many other mystery series of the day. And we're talking about Nevada Barr, Jane Langton, William Tapley, Warren Easley, Erling Fowler, Susan Wittick, Albert, Jess Lowry, on and on and on. All of these different mystery series, just because this was the trigger to all of those. And today, of course, I'm hooked on the Armand Gamache series by Louise Penny. So this affection for mystery series, although it started with Nancy Drew, was reignited by Sue Grafton and Kinsey Milhome. Now, in the 1990s, I started writing book and video reviews for professional library journals. I also wrote some longer pieces for myself and for friends. I had wanted to be a writer since I was in 5th grade. I also read a lot of books about writing. Here's a secret. Sometimes it's easier to read about writing than it is to actually sit down and write. So, anyway, I now have shelves and shelves and shelves of books about writing. And if I had to pick just one book to represent the whole bunch, then it would be On Writing by Stephen King. Originally came out in 2000. I don't read Stephen King's fiction. I've only read one of his fiction books, but I did read this book on writing. Have you? I recommend it to anyone who is an aspiring writer, or to anybody who wants to know more about Stephen King's process. And a new 20th anniversary edition of this book came out in paperback 2 years ago with a different black and white cover with a picture of him on it. Includes some new material. But hey, if you want to be a writer, why not learn from one of the best, okay? On Writing by Stephen King. And that was my number 9. Thank you very much. What I was writing most about 20 years ago was reviews on Amazon. This was a trend that was just beginning, and it was a new and exciting world back in those early glory days. The focus there was on thoughtful, accurate, and quality reviews, and not on mere reviews of quantity. When you read a book specifically to review it, you had to approach it as objectively as possible. You often have a different mindset when you read for pleasure than when you know you are reading to review the book. I can't go into those details here. But what I loved most in those days was finding books that had no reviews on them and going back and reading them and putting a good, decent review on there. And there was a clear hierarchy among us volunteer reviewers. You moved up in the ratings whenever people clicked on your review and said that it helped them. The more you wrote, the more votes you could get, the higher up in the hierarchy you would go. It was very addicting. Yes. I think I got as high as among the top 300 reviewers at one point, and more than 580 of my reviews are still posted on the Big A, even though I don't write on there anymore. They're hard to find. I usually avoid saying the name of the biggest competitor to independent bookstores because I now manage one. I did once write about my experience in an essay called Confessions of an Amazon Reviewer that appeared in the very little-known librarian periodical called Writing and Publishing, The Librarian's Handbook. Yeah, you might find that in an academic library. But anyway, in the fall of 2007, I learned that a new book was coming out. My number 10, Eden's Outcast, the story of Louisa May Alcott and her father by John Matteson. It was a book that I wanted to read anyway, but man, I always, because I liked, I wanted to read about Louisa and Bronson Alcott. They were friends of Thoreau. But I really wanted to be one of the first reviewers of it too. So I grabbed the library copy as soon as it came in. An advantage to being a librarian. And I read it. Terrific book. So I, as quickly as I could, crafted a lengthy positive review and posted it on Amazon. It was the first review on there. It was the only one on there for a while. And then I found out that John Matteson was going to have a book signing at the Concord Bookshop. And so I lived about an hour and a half away at the time, and I made sure I got there. He was nice. He was funny. This was the only book signing he was going to have for Eden's Outcasts. So at the time, I bought my own copy. And in the book signing line, I waited in the back. I wanted to be the last person because I really wanted to talk to him a little longer than everybody else. So eventually I got up to the table and I introduced myself and I said, "Hi, my name's Corinne Smith. I read your book. I loved it. It's terrific. I wrote a review of it on Amazon." And as I am talking, John is standing up and reaching out to hug me, and he said, "You did," because he'd read the review and it was the only one out there at the time, and he wasn't getting a whole lot of publicity for this book. And it was really, really interesting. And so we did have a chance to sit down and chat about writing, and because I had some questions about how he crafted some of his things in here, and we exchanged email addresses, and I thought, wow, how cool is that? As a reviewer, I'm meeting an author, and we could correspond, and we could, maybe become friends. This is pretty cool. So anyway, some months later, I saw my Amazon reviewer number increase dramatically. And this always happened when a hardcover book came out in paperback and a new audience found it, or when a book was getting attention in the news and suddenly people wanted to find out more about it, and so they'd read the reviews and they'd hit on your review. So my number was going up. I had no idea which book was driving it until I got an email from John. And he said, "I don't know whether or not you heard, but Eden's Outcast just won the Pulitzer Prize for biography, and I'm reaching out to thank everybody who believed in the book early on." I'm like, oh my goodness. I had chills reading that. I have chills just reading that to you right now. Of course, I was thrilled for John and thrilled for the book. I mean, it deserved it. He deserved it. But think that I was maybe vicariously connected to this somehow, just as a mere cheerleader, oh, mind-blowing. It still is. So thanks again, friend John. We're still friends. Our paths continue to cross a few times a year. Today, my original review on that site is buried in the 120 reviews that are on there. It's no longer at the top, which is fine. I know what it says, and I know what the story is behind it. And now you guys do too. And I write reviews now for rambles.net instead. I still read histories and mystery series and nature books and many, many, many books that these trigger books have led me to. But now, in addition to them, I also listen to audiobooks. So I'm cheating here and giving you 11 instead of 10. And I listen to memoirs and autobiographies read by the authors themselves, by the people themselves. And I'm showing you Eat, Pray, Love by Elizabeth Gilbert because I think that's the best of the bunch that I've heard in the last couple of years. So yeah, I have expanded my reading into using good use of my commuting time. And I love it. I love it. And that, my friends, wraps up my analysis of the books that have most influenced me and informed me as a lifelong reader. I imagine that this might have been a trip down memory lane for some of you too. So what's the takeaway message here? Books can be powerful. They can even change people's lives. Have any of these changed yours? I'd love to know. So reach out, subscribe, like, you know the routine. I'm Corinne Smith. Thanks a lot for seeing my 10 plus books that have changed my reading life.